Breaking news from around your world on this Wednesday, March 20th, 2019. I'm Larry Rice. United Nations judges on Wednesday sentenced former Bosnian Serb political leader Radovan Karadzic to life in prison on appeal, ending one of the most momentous trials over genocide committed during the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. Appeals judges upheld Karadzic's conviction for the 1995 massacre of 8,000 Muslim men and boys at Srebrenica and ruled that the 40-year sentence imposed at the close of his trial was too light, given the immensity of the crimes in question. The sentence cannot be appealed anymore. The 73-year-old Karadzic, who had argued that the UN court was biased against him, was convicted in 2016 for the genocide at Srebrenica. He was also found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity for the 44-month Serb siege of the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo that terrorized the civilian population, and for overseeing a campaign of ethnic cleansing that drove Croats and Muslims out of Serb-claimed areas of Bosnia. On appeal, prosecutors had sought a life sentence and a second genocide conviction for his role in ethnic cleansing. Judges rejected the request for the second genocide conviction, but upheld his conviction on all other war crimes and crimes against humanity charges, including persecution and murder. Mozambique began 3 days of national mourning Wednesday for more than 200 victims of Cyclone Idai, while the death toll in neighboring Zimbabwe rose to more than 100 from one of the most destructive storms to strike southern Africa in decades. Torrential rains were expected to continue into Thursday, and floodwaters were still rising, according to aid groups trying to get food, water, and clothing to desperate survivors. It will be days before Mozambique's inundated plains drain toward the Indian Ocean, and even longer before the full scale of the devastation is known. People have been clinging to trees and huddling on rooftops since the cyclone roared in over the weekend, and aid groups were desperately trying to rescue as many as they can. The UN Humanitarian Office said the town of Buzi, with some 200,000 people, was at risk of becoming at least partially submerged. Meanwhile, international aid is starting to trickle in. The Red Cross, speaking of the tragedy, said it's much larger than anyone could ever anticipate. The UN said floodwaters are predicted to rise significantly in the coming days, and 350,000 people are at risk. Hundreds of mourners gathered Wednesday for the first funerals for the 50 worshippers killed in last week's mass shootings at 2 mosques in New Zealand. The first ceremony was for 44-year-old Khalid Mustafa and his 15-year-old son Hamza, a father and son who fled the civil war in Syria. Mustafa's wife, Salwa, told Radio New Zealand the family had been assured they were moving to the safest country in the world, the most wonderful country you can go. You will start a very wonderful life there. But it wasn't. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said it was gutting to know this happened to a family which came here for safety and for refuge. 4 other burials were scheduled for Wednesday, but most families are still waiting for investigators to release the bodies of victims. The pilots of a doomed Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX aircraft scrambled through a handbook to understand why the jet was lurching downwards in the final minutes before it hit the water, killing all 189 people on board. That's what 3 people with knowledge of the cockpit voice recorder contents told Reuters. The investigation into the crash last October has taken on new relevance as the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration and other regulators grounded the model last week after a second deadly accident in Ethiopia. Investigators examining the Indonesian crash are considering how a computer ordered the plane to dive in response to data from a faulty sensor and whether the pilots had enough training to respond appropriately to the emergency, among other factors. Following the second fatal accident, U.S. authorities are reviewing whether enough was done to ensure the plane was safe to fly, while attention is also focused on the training of the Lion Air crew and whether airplane manuals are clear enough. It is the first time any of the voice recorder contents from the Lion Air flight have been revealed in the press. Meanwhile, the Transportation Department is asking for a review of the certification process involving Boeing's 737 MAX 8 airliner, virtually grounded worldwide over safety concerns. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao called for an internal investigation into the FAA's approval of the aircraft in 2017. The department asked Inspector General Calvin Scoville to audit the agency's approval of the MAX 8. Chao wrote a memo to Scoville that said, "Safety is the top priority of the department." The FAA was slow to ground all 737 MAX jets, even after other countries barred the aircraft from their skies pending an investigation. One problem, experts say, could be that the automatic anti-stall maneuver engages after receiving data from an angle of attack sensor, meaning there's no redundancy for safety. The FAA is also being questioned by Congress over its role in approving the jets as safe to fly. An Indian airline faces significant troubles with a looming pilot strike and financial struggles involving planes it can't pay for. This week, Jet Airways learned stakeholder Etihad will stop investments after the carrier said it will default on a bond interest payment due Wednesday. Government officials convened an emergency meeting and asked state-run banks to bail out the airline. Meanwhile, the pilots' union said it will stop flying April 1st unless they are paid 3 months of salary that they're already owed. The engineers' union has also complained in a letter to India's General of Civil Aviation that they haven't been paid for 3 months either. Many employees have left the airline, and engineers say attrition could get worse as the impasse drags on. The rebellion has fueled concern about whether planes are being properly maintained. At a second emergency meeting, the Indian government considered grounding all Jet Airways flights, but didn't. Only 41 planes remain in Jet Airways' fleet, down from 119 a few weeks ago, because the aircraft are being seized for non-payment. The airline, which at one time was among India's largest, faces competition from Inigo, Go Air, and SpiceJet. A federal jury in San Francisco has ruled the popular herbicide Roundup was a likely cause of a California man's non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a cancer of the blood that affects lymph tissues. The 6-person jury deliberated for 4 days before ruling in favor of Edwin Hardiman, who said he used Roundup for decades before he was diagnosed in 2015. Jurors agreed that the 70-year-old Hardiman proved the herbicide was probably a substantial factor in his affliction. The jury will next determine if Monsanto, the maker of Roundup, is liable for Hardiman's condition, and if it is, how much it should pay in damages. There are 760 cases against Monsanto before the U.S. district judge who is hearing the Hardiman case, and another 10,000 pending nationwide. The San Francisco case could create settlement guidelines for those lawsuits. Hardiman attorneys Amy Wagstaff and Jennifer Moore said in a statement after the verdict, "It is clear from Monsanto's actions that it does not particularly care whether its product is in fact giving people cancer." German pharmaceutical and chemical giant Bayer, which acquired Monsanto last summer, said it's disappointed in the ruling. The Food and Drug Administration approved the first postpartum depression drug called brexanolone, or Zulresso. It's a synthetic form of a hormone that increases during pregnancy and plummets after childbirth, possibly contributing to postpartum depression. The drug is administered intravenously to treat the sometimes life-threatening condition, which affects about 1 in 9 new mothers. That's according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Due to risks such as excessive sedation, Zulresso will only be administered in a certified healthcare facility. The infusion takes 60 hours, and during a clinical trial, most participants showed improvement within 24 hours of receiving the drug and are reporting they still felt the positive effects of the treatment 30 days later. The Walt Disney Company formally closed its $71.3 billion purchase of 21st Century Fox assets early Wednesday, dramatically expanding what was already an entertainment giant. Disney now owns the core of Rupert Murdoch's former empire, including the 20th Century Fox movie and television studios, home of the X-Men, Avatar, and Simpson franchises, Ice Age animation studio Blue Sky, Fox Searchlight Pictures, the FX and National Geographic channels, and Fox's interest in Hulu. Disney CEO Bob Iger said in a statement, "This is an extraordinary and historic moment for us, one that will create significant long-term value for our company and our shareholders." Disney bought Pixar in 2006 for $7.4 billion, Marvel Entertainment in 2010 for $4 billion, and Lucasfilm in 2012 for $4 billion. Baseball star Mike Trout is close to sealing a $430 million 12-season deal with the Los Angeles Angels that would be the largest contract in professional sports history. The deal, first reported by ESPN, lacks opt-out clauses, which means the superstar center fielder will probably spend the rest of his career with the team that drafted him out of high school. It's been a high-profile offseason for Major League Baseball, which also signed massive free agent deals with Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. Trout's landmark deal reflects his strong record. The 27-year-old has already tallied 240 career home runs and collected 2 Most Valuable Player awards. And that's your update for this Wednesday, March 20th, 2019. I'm Larry Rice. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.